I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the updated Hyundai i30 hatchback. Now, last week you and I looked at the i30 sedan together, and judging from the comments, about half of people really don't like the way the new i30 sedan looks because it's so out there. So for that group, the massaged and facelifted i30 hatch will probably do the trick, because it takes the handsome shape of the current PD generation Hyundai i30 and adds in a bit more glitz. So we have these, prominent triangular LED daytime running lights that have been lifted from the new generation Tucson, and just a couple of other little nips and tucks around the bodywork of this popular hatchback, one of Australia's most popular cars. Interestingly though, only the 2-litre i30s so far have been given this facelift. The 1.6-litre turbo models, which are called N-Line, have not been updated with the new design, and that's because they're coming down a production line that is just not tooled to do that work for the turbocharged versions, which is a pretty weird omission in my opinion. And if I were Hyundai, I probably would have insisted that everything looked the same. But still, if you're not interested in going too fast and you want the facelifted i30 as soon as possible, then the 2-litre versions will satisfy. Also worth keeping in mind that the updated i30N, which will arrive in the first part of 2021, will in fact wear the new design. So that will be a consistent thing. Plus, I expect the N-Line versions will be updated, pretty soon. Now the changes carry through to the interior of the updated i30 as well. So we've got a much larger screen, we've got a 10-inch widescreen up here on the dash, much higher resolution than before. The controllers are still there, but they're now touch capacitive and they've been relegated to the bottom of the screen. But it's very snappy, there's a better processor behind it, but the integrated navigation also works well. Now the i30 that we're sat in here is the Elite model, and we have stuff like these leather accented seats, which are quite comfortable. They've got like a diamond shaped pattern through them. They work well. The interior as a whole feels decent, not as upmarket as something like a Ford Focus or a Volkswagen Golf, but certainly not bargain basement. The visuals are certainly not as flashy as the new sedan, but the quality is better. We've got soft materials up here on the dash, soft materials on the door, and on the whole, it just feels a little more expensively made. But things like this steering wheel have carried across from the previous version of the i30 hatch. It still works well though, but it's not as flash as the new sedan. Neither are the dials fully digital. Instead, we have a partially digital cluster that's a bit like what you get on the Santa Fe SUV. We still have an analog tachometer, oil temperature, and fuel gauge. It's just your speedo and trip computer information that's become digitized. In terms of storage, it's pretty good. We've got wireless charging down here and a USB port. Big cup holders, spot for the key here, and also a deep bin with a bit of flock lining between the seats too. But those door bins are still on the small side for this segment. All in all though, quite a tidy little update, but just small changes to the cabin of the i30. Let's check out the back seat. Now that door opens fairly wide, easy to climb into the back of this small Hyundai. And as you'll see, even though it is a small car, nice and compact for the city, you can get adults into the back row nice and easily. So for myself at 6 foot, headroom's good, legroom's good, and toe room is also acceptable. You could fit someone in the middle because the floor is really flat, one of the flattest in this segment, which is really good to see. So it's quite a flexible and practical vehicle. And you get a few amenities. You get air vents, great in a hot country like Australia. Now, actually in the back row, you still get soft touch materials, which is now super rare in this segment. A Volkswagen Golf doesn't have that, a Mazda 3 doesn't have that. We also get a flip down armrest, 2 cup holders. So on the whole, it's quite a nice experience sitting in the back of the i30, even if most of the time it'll probably only have 1 or 2 seats filled. Heading round to the back, this is quite a smaller vehicle than the i30 sedan, which has a really massive boot. But the i30 hatch does have the benefit of that tailgate that opens all the way up, which is going to be a little more flexible if you're trying to maneuver a taller item into the back. Now, this cargo cover is pretty solid, but it does move a little bit out of your way, revealing a deep boot. So you will have to be lifting your heavy suitcases up and out of this vehicle rather than nice and flat like some hatches are able to do. Now in terms of special features, we do actually have 2 hooks back here, which is more than you can say for a Mazda 3 hatchback. And then beneath this floor, we have a full-size spare in the i30, so becoming one of the rarest vehicles in its segment now in terms of having a full-size spare, which is really nice flexibility. if you're a country buyer or you plan on taking road trips in the i30. So what's the facelifted i30 hatch like to drive? And in particular, how different is it to that new i30 sedan that we drove together last week? Well, it's actually pretty different because the hatch is on a different platform to the sedan. It's on an older platform. In some ways that makes it better to drive, in some ways it makes it worse. But in particular, there's quite a difference underneath the bonnet, and that's that the hatch and the sedan, while they both use 2-litre naturally aspirated petrol 4-cylinder engines, at the low end of the range, they're different engines. The sedan has a multi-point injected, naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, whereas here in the i30 hatch, it's actually direct injected, so the engine makes a little bit more power and quite a bit more torque. So even though neither are turbocharged, neither are really competing with the likes of the Golf or the Focus on outright torque, in the hatch it's just a little superior. So here with the direct injected unit, we're producing 120 kilowatts of power and 203 newton meters of torque. And you still have to work pretty hard for both of those outputs. As I said, it isn't turbo, but the hatch is just a little bit more effortless in terms of engine performance and also a bit more refined. It tends to be just a little bit more hushed, this car, compared to the sedan, which is perhaps a little bit down on noise insulation, and also the engine itself isn't quite as refined. That said, you do hear the i30 hatch working in ways you won't hear a Golf or the new Skoda Scala, for example, because of those turbochargers that those cars employ, which just keep those revs lower while it's accelerating. That being said, a lot of people don't like turbo engines, and there is an element of mechanical simplicity here to the i30, which some people will like. And that also applies to the 6-speed torque converter automatic gearbox, which is very conventional, no dual clutches in the 2-litre version of the i30 hatch, though the optional 1.6-litre turbo in the N-line versions does in fact have a dual clutch. That engine is lustier. It produces 150 kilowatts of power and 265 newton meters of torque, and actually manages to use about the same or less fuel as a 2-litre in the real world. The claims for the 2-litre are quite optimistic. We never seem to get it really too far below 9 litres per 100 Ks in real world testing. If you've got a bit of town driving involved on the highway, it'll calm down a bit more than that, but this isn't one of the most frugal base engines in the small car class. Now the ride and handling are quite different to the sedan because they are on different platforms. They use a different chassis. The hatchback is quite a lot smaller. That does make it feel a little more agile on a country road, and in town a bit more maneuverable as well. But the sedan actually has quite nice fluency to it in the way that it drives when you're pushing on a little bit in rural areas, and I actually think it's quite well sorted. The hatchback is very good as well. It's one of the most competent cars in its class in terms of driving dynamics. It perhaps just doesn't feel quite as natural in the hand when you're punting it down a country road. Of course, how many people are going to be doing that with a 2-litre i30? I don't really know, but I guess it's nice to know that you can. Part of the reason for that is the sedan is actually about 50 kilograms lighter than the hatchback, which is unusual given how much larger it is. We're just under 1,300 kilos here in the hatch, which is also pretty light. I think it's interesting to note there are some quality differences though. I think the hatch is a little bit quieter. I've already mentioned how the interior is better built in the i30 hatch than the sedan, even though it's considerably less flashy from a visual perspective. It is something interesting to consider. However, one thing I would point out is that in the hatch, that boom from the torsion beam at the rear is actually a little more pronounced, and that's almost certainly because in a hatchback, the rear end is open to us here in the driver's seat, so we tend to hear those reverberations from the rear end a bit more in a hatch than in a sedan, because in the sedan those noises are going into the boot, which is closed off from the cabin, so you have a slightly harder time hearing the boom from the torsion beam. Now that's not something that affects the i30 N-line hatch, which has a multi-link independent rear suspension and is more refined over bumps. Now the hatch does get Hyundai's Smart Sense suite as standard. They've dropped the Go, so that means that every i30 hatch now gets adaptive cruise, you get lane keeping assist, and on the Elite you get blind spot monitoring, but both of them have a nice crisp reversing camera. You also get AEB that now works at higher speeds than before because we have a fusion system rather than just one system in the previous i30 hatch. So all in all, it feels like a nice update that's brought it a little more up to date in terms of tech, but no fundamental changes to how the i30 hatch drives. So that's a look at the updated 2021 Hyundai i30 hatch. Quite a nice little bump to the visual appeal of this car. I personally like the new front end. Just looking forward to it being translated across to the 1.6 litre turbo models that are by some margin the most desirable non-N i30s. Now you can let me know what you think down below this video of the updated i30. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.